It's not until a person has a mystical experience that they wake up to this entire dimension of being. And then it's very real because they've had an experience of it. They've looked through the microscope or the telescope. Now we're in a condition where we can be initiated into these worlds.
Concrescence, the process through which seemingly dissimilar phenomena are integrated into a coherent whole.
All of the technologies that we think of as the modern internet and the personal computers were really created first in an area around Stanford University between 1960 and 1975, at the same time that there was both a vibrant counterculture and ideas about augmenting human intelligence, augmenting the human mind, were being pursued both by the technologists, and they were sort of alive in a lot of the counterculture community that was taking place around Stanford. The technology didn't emerge in the vacuum. Technology is actually mediated by things that are going on in society, whether they be politics or economics or culture. In 1965, 1966, there were two men on either side of the Stanford campus. One was John McCarthy and one was Doug Engelbart. McCarthy was leading a research group that wanted to replace the human mind. He was exploring these technologies called artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence at that time, the researchers thought that they could create a computerized artificial intelligence in a decade. On the other side of the campus, Engelbart was doing something different. He was trying to augment the human mind. He was trying to build a set of technologies that would allow humans to cooperate more quickly and invent things more efficiently. I've really struggled to try to understand what the relationship is between the use of psychedelic drugs by a small community of people during the 60s and the development of computer technology. And I'm still uncomfortable by saying one led to the other. It's clear to me, however, that they both emerged at the same time, and there were aspects of each that resonated. Doug Engelbart had this idea about amplifying the human mind. The people who were exploring LSD during the 1960s wanted to expand the human mind. Those were very similar ideas, and the impetus was related, and they resonated back and forth. And I think it's possible to say that each side drew on the other for sort of vision and inspiration. The threads that were emerging in California on the edge of the United States in the 60s led to both, and I think it's not a coincidence. They both happened, within the space of 5 miles. The interesting thing about Engelbart is that he was willing to experiment with all kinds of ideas, from psychodrama to psychedelic drugs, to new computer technologies, to ideas that were taken from Mao's Red Guards. And so it was a wild and unusual time. I mean, if you went into SRI back in the 60s, on one floor you'd have these guys with white shirts and pocket protectors who were designing smart missiles. And on Engelbart's floors you'd have, oriental rugs and pillows and yoga workstations and wine and drugs in the refrigerator. Just a very different cultural atmosphere. And out of that came most of the important ideas that would become personal computing. In 1968, in December, Engelbart sort of brought everything that his research group had developed during the 60s together in one just amazing demonstration that was given at Brooks Hall at the Joint Qual Computer Conference. He had a huge screen, a video screen, which was very unusual at that point to have an interactive video screen. And he sat up on stage, and he had a mouse in one hand, a keyboard. He had a display for himself. He had this thing called a chord key set that allowed him to enter textual information with his left hand while he was mousing with his right. And on the screen he had windows and hypertext and all the visual stuff that would become sort of the modern computer interface. And you have to remember that at that time, computing was not interactive. You would take your stack of cards and you would hand them to the sort of high priest of the data center. And Engelbart blew all that up. He showed 1,000 of the best computer scientists in the country a very different model of computing. And everything was different after that demonstration. It was called the mother of all demos. And what's significant is that a lot of his ideas emerged not just from sort of a pure set of technology events, but from this real sort of open exploratory group that he put together in the midst of both a political and a drug counterculture.
Ecological crisis is taking place, and that more global consciousness is taking place, and that psychedelic awakening is taking place, and feminism. All these things are happening. One other thing takes place, and that is the first view of the Earth from outside the Earth, beyond its atmosphere, and some human beings who represent, in a sense, all human beings, have been in a position of being able to look back on the Earth, and then photographs have been brought back, which we've all seen. A perspective is given that was simply impossible before.
In the 60s we were born. We got off the planet and we saw ourselves as a living body. We had the Beatles music, we had the substances that expanded our consciousness, we had the awakening of the women, and we had the environmental movement. All of this late 60s, early 70s. And we began to realize that we're overpopulating and polluting. We didn't even know that until around the 60s. We're learning we have to coordinate as a planetary body. We didn't have to do that before. We were all separate.
Medicine. Any mediation necessary to correct a diseased state of being.
Obviously, Americans are least of any people in the world afraid of drugs, because there's a drugstore on every corner. So if they are so afraid of mind-expanding drugs, obviously it's the mind expansion that they are afraid of. And we are made afraid of mind expansion by precisely the people who have a vested interest in our minds being quite narrow.
What's happening is these chemicals have the capacity to expand consciousness in ways that we're just not accustomed to thinking. So it's opening up the envelope of consciousness into new territories for us to think about and to try to imagine.
In many respects, the war on drugs was fueled by the fears of Tim Leary and what he had to say, and the surging use of psychedelics by youth during the 1960s.
The young generation with these states had many dimensions. That, one of it was certainly that aesthetic aspect, just the beautiful display, but there was also an element of tremendous freedom, sort of disinhibition. All the sort of cultural restrictions being kind of a Dionysian element, breaking into consciousness. And then I think even if people did not have specific healing intention, that something within them felt there was a kind of a therapeutic potential, that you could heal. You could heal emotionally, you could heal psychosomatically. And then, of course, there was that other dimension, which is the opening of the spiritual aspects of life.
Native peoples around the world have developed structures and rituals which optimize safety. And there's a lot to be learned. There's a lot to be learned about how critical set and setting is to outcomes.